Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you here again. My name is Paul O'Neill. On behalf of Kingston's Buried Treasures, we want to again welcome you to our sixth lecture in our lecture series. The subject tonight is Colonel George Chandler, namesake of Colonel Chandler Drive, shortest interstate in the United States, and also, besides for that accomplishment, he is really the founder of the New York State Police. So we are very fortunate tonight to have as our featured speaker Major Robin Benziger, who is a director of training at for the New York State Police, and is really, I don't think I'm stretching it too far to say that she's really the unofficial historian for the New York State Police. So without further ado, if you can please welcome Major Robin Benziger.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. It's just a huge pleasure for me to be here tonight to talk to you about George Fletcher Chandler and one of my favorite subjects, the New York State Police. Thank you so much for the invitation. I am not an historian, but as the director of training at our academy, I am in charge of our small museum there and the collection that goes along with it. So I welcome your input tonight, your questions, and any anecdotes that you might have, because I'm sure that will make the discussion more interesting. It's been a great experience preparing for tonight. As a bit of a state police history buff myself, I was acquainted with what we commonly know about Colonel Chandler and the beginnings of our agency, but I was quite surprised by some of what I learned about the rest of his life. I spoke with some old-timers retired from our job. I dived into our archives, and I was fortunate to be able to connect with some people who remember him well and were very generous in sharing their memories. To that end, I'd like to thank the Lauren and Fuller families for their help in filling in some of the blanks about Colonel Chandler's personal life. It's a real compliment that some of them are here tonight, so thanks for your support. I would call Colonel George Fletcher Chandler a true Renaissance man. He was a physician, an Army officer, a professional musician, a self-styled criminologist, an author, a world traveler, and a college professor. He was a brilliant man, devoted to his adopted home, the city of Kingston, who contributed a great deal to its community. The crowning achievement of his remarkable life's work is an institution that profoundly impacted public safety in New York State and changed the course of policing forever. That institution, the New York State Police, went on to evolve into one of the most influential and highly regarded police agencies in the nation. Perhaps the most surprising thing about its beginnings is that Chandler, a man with no police background whatsoever, not only created a highly effective police force, but he had very different goals when he accepted the offer from Governor Whitman to do so. This story takes place in an enormously creative era in American history, where high ideals could be the driving force behind the vision, the dreams, and the hard work of one extraordinary person, with fantastic, lasting results. George Fletcher Chandler was born December 13, 1872, at Clyde, New York, to George and Izora Schwartz Chandler. His father was a Methodist minister, and his mother was an artist and writer who wrote 3 bestsellers at the time and was the first woman in the United States to receive a master's degree in painting. She later taught at Syracuse and Columbia University. The family moved frequently. When George Sr. took new assignments living in Towanda, Pennsylvania, Corning, Ithaca, Syracuse, and Buffalo, New York, and Portland, Oregon. He spent his early childhood in Lockport, New York. Young George Chandler made his solo debut as a violinist at the age of 15. Studying under Dr. William H. Schultz, the founder of the School of Music at Syracuse University. He went on to study under a violin fellowship in New York City, but an attack of quinsy disabled one of his little fingers and ended his hopes for a musical career. Now, thank goodness for Google, okay? Quinsy, it turns out, it has something to do with abscessed tonsils, so I'm not really clear on how this affected his finger. I have to take their word for it. But this talent did help finance his education, as he was able to support himself playing the violin and singing. and a feature article in the Poughkeepsie New Yorker of May 6, 1956, quotes Chandler and reveals what I think is his dry sense of humor. "I even sang at the Eden Musée in 14th Street. That was a famous waxworks, similar to the waxworks in London. It had a chamber of horrors with wax figures representing famous murderers, instruments of murder, and an automatic chess player. They used to show stereopticon views, such as Christ going into Jerusalem, and I would sing something appropriate." He was educated at Syracuse University from 1890 to 92, and then at Columbia, graduating from their College of Physicians and Surgeons in 1895. Dr. Chandler became a visiting surgeon at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York, specializing in abdominal surgery, and eventually was named the Chief of Gynecology and Outpatient Services. He was also the house doctor at Wanamaker's Department Store in 1898, making him the first industrial physician in the country. The doctor moved to Kingston in 1900 and married the violin teacher's daughter, Martha. He began his private practice a year later, January 1st, 1901. That year also saw the birth of his first son, Daniel Vincent, followed by his son, Femer, in 1905. The family lived at number 11 East Chestnut Street here in Kingston, and the house still stands if you're interested in going to see it. Daniel went on to graduate from West Point and serve as the executive officer of the military academy during World War II. Femer became known as Chick Chandler, and he worked with stars such as Tom Mix in stage, screen, and television productions. Martha passed away in 1931. Over time, Dr. Chandler served as surgeon-in-chief at Benedictine Hospital and for the West Shore, Wallkill Valley, and Ontario and Western Railroads. Dr. Chandler became a National Guard physician in 1907, rising to the rank of major in command of Company M when he was sent to regular Army training. The discipline and order of military life appealed to him, and he became a range instructor and a horseman in addition to his medical-related duties. Chandler was one of only 2 National Guard officers to be sent to the prestigious Army Service School at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And it was during this time that he organized one of the first basketball leagues in the country. There's a lot of detail like this about this guy that's very surprising. In June of 1916, Chandler became adjutant to Brigadier General James W. Lester during the Mexican border trouble, serving for 9 months. This experience left an indelible mark on the man and set the stage for the next chapter of his life. Meanwhile, other events in the country were generating framework for future endeavors. In 1905, the Pennsylvania Constabulary was established as the first modern state police organization in the country. And a young woman from New York named Catherine Mayo wrote its story in a book titled Justice to All. In 1913, the murder of a young man in Westchester County would lead to the heightened public concern for police protection in the rural areas of New York State. At the time, local constables, which provided the bulk of policing outside of the cities and small villages, could handle minor family squabbles, but had no capability for the detection and prevention of crime on any scale. Now, I'm about to tell you a story that I love, and I've told many times, and I told it a lot before I realized that the principal stars of this story didn't have the right to vote at the time. Sam Howell was employed by Miss Moika Newell as a foreman on her estate in Bedford Hills. One day, while en route from the bank with that week's payroll, Mr. Howell was ambushed by a gang of men and shot during the robbery. Although he was able to escape and provide a description of his attackers, which included 2 of his own employees, along with some information about where they might be found, before succumbing to his wounds, the local constable did little to pursue the matter, and Samuel Howell's killers were never held responsible for their crime. This outraged Miss Newell, who, it turned out, had some very influential friends, which included prominent New Yorkers like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She teamed up with these friends and her dear friend and author, Catherine Mayo, in 1915 and formed the Committee for State Police. The The two women spent the next 2 years lobbying the state legislature for the creation of a state police force for New York. They were eventually successful, despite strong opposition from conservatives who objected to spending the money, as well as organized labor, who were well aware of the role that the Pennsylvania State Police were playing in the coal strikes in that state. Large cities in New York were against a state force because they controlled their own police forces. And so a provision was built in the legislation to prohibit the action by this new agency in any cities except upon the order of the governor or a request by the mayor of the city and the approval of the governor. And this is still in place today. The women's efforts were successful when on April 11, 1917, a bill was passed creating the Department of State Police. That bill passed by 1 vote. Governor Charles Whitman was old friends with Dr. Chandler from their college days. They had lived in the same rooming house on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and they developed a close relationship while Whitman attended law school and Chandler was studying medicine at Columbia. When the governor received the mandate to form a new police force, he called upon his old friend for advice. Chandler thought at the time that the reason Whitman had summoned him to Albany was that he was ill. But instead he found himself in the governor's office, deep in conversation, generating ideas about how this great project might be handled. As Chandler recounted later on, after several hours, Whitman turned suddenly from looking out the window, and he pronounced, "I have the man. It's you." Now Chandler, a man with no police background, training, or experience of any kind, was initially reluctant to accept this proposition. He had just completed his tour of duty at the Mexican border, and he was far more interested in returning to military service with his regiment. Several days later, he was invited to lunch at the Executive Mansion in Albany. Among those present was Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, still a very dynamic figure. Whitman announced that he would grant Roosevelt the authority to raise a division in New York for war purposes under the Militia Act. Later in the day, Roosevelt turned to Chandler and he told him that if he would organize the constabulary, then Roosevelt would ask the governor to let him take the unit to Europe to fight, and Chandler would be the chief of cavalry. Now I'm reading this story, of course, to research for today, and I'm wondering what role alcohol may have played in this conversation. Because these guys are sitting around the governor's mansion all day, right? They're having lunch, and they're having cigars, and they're having probably some cocktails. Chandler saw visions of the Rough Riders and advised the governor he would take the job. And the governor wasted no time in appointing him superintendent the very next day, May 2nd, 1917, presumably before he could change his mind. It turns out that Washington was not at all interested in having Colonel Roosevelt raise a military division for service, and Chandler was left with, as he put it, a $500,000 appropriation and nothing else to do but organize the department. George Fletcher Chandler had a rare gift for organization. In the space of 4 months, starting from scratch, he put together a fully equipped and trained force, the first of its kind. Our original mission to serve the rural areas of New York State has changed little in the nearly 100 years since. One of his first steps was to visit Pennsylvania State Police and the Canadian Royal Northwest Mounted Police. He had already decided to use a paramilitary model versus a traditional model to create the highly disciplined and formally organized force that he envisioned. His hand was in every aspect of planning. He devised candidate screening and selection methods. He conducted all the physical exams personally. He wrote the entrance exam. He was looking for, and I saw this in the New York Times yesterday, unmarried men between the ages of 21 and 35, not more than 165 pounds or less than 145, muscular, mobile, not too massive for quick movement, and not light enough to blow away. It's quite an ad. Colonel Chandler found facilities. He traveled to Lathrop, Missouri to oversee the purchase of 243 Morgan horses, designed the uniform, and there'll be more about that in just a moment. He wrote procedures, he designed the training program, and he hired his staff. The officer corps was drawn largely from the 1st New York Cavalry, New York National Guard. These were expert horsemen who had served previously with Colonel Chandler. At his request, 51 soldiers were released from active duty as National Guardsmen to fill the class, as the rigorous entrance requirements had knocked many civilians out of contention, even after passing the written exam. In June of 1917, the first troopers began training at the former home of Troop D, 1st New York Cavalry, outside Manlius, New York, and that's a picture that was taken during July that year. It had been renamed Camp Nuevo to honor the 2 women who were so instrumental in the beginnings of the new agency. 232 so-called campmen were trained that summer in horsemanship, shooting, police techniques, the law, first aid, and military drill. And if you go there today, the site is presently a golf course. You see a wonderful historic marker. Chandler had strong opinions about who he wanted his troopers to be, what he wanted them to do, and what policing in general should be about. He was committed to the idea of a professional police force with highly qualified candidates who exercised a good judgment and behaved properly with minimal supervision. And we still aspire to that today. He did a beautiful job in communicating that in his writings. One of his first directives was a document which we know as Order Number 1, which was drafted on June 1st, 1917, and it described the troopers' intended duties and code of conduct. An excerpt from that says, "Never hesitate to render assistance of any kind, and let nothing be too much trouble which you can do for the people you come in contact with." So simple. Chandler conceived of the idea of policing as a profession, and he saw a parallel between the work of physicians and police. In Bulletin Number 1, he also said, "A physician aims to save life and cure disease. A lawyer helps people out of trouble. A clergyman tries to make people better. A soldier fights for his country in time of war." These are fine professions of service. The service a trooper renders to his community is an auxiliary to all of these, and his duty in a measure embraces the work of these 4 great professions. The superintendent saw the prevention of crime, the protection of life, and the maintenance of law and order as similar to what a physician does to preserve health, prevent disease, and treat injury. The force operated in a time before social service agencies of any kind, and offered, and still offers, full-service policing, which means you call us, we show up. We have never been strictly highway patrol. Chandler's idea that police were there to help and not just arrest people was actually revolutionary at the time. In addition to their law enforcement duties, troopers quickly became the people to whom rural New Yorkers turned whenever they had troubles of any kind. Living up to Chandler's vision, troopers did everything from mediating minor disputes to providing food and clothing to destitute families. In one description of their work, it was said that they were tracers of lost children, cattle, dogs, cats, advisors on legal, agricultural, engineering, architectural, and sentimental problems, rescuers of stalled automobiles, saviors of disrupted homes, and we still are. The superintendent insisted the new department be free of political influence, which was no easy task given the traditions and climate and state and local politics of the time, of any time, right? He saw to it that the new agency remain outside the civil service system and had to refuse more than one legislator who wanted to recommend a good candidate until everyone got his message. So who were these brand new troopers? They were absolutely glamorous figures, rough and ready by one description, which was important because they were on their own. Most, if not all, were World War I vets. In the writings of Frederick Vandewater, who edited the original State Trooper magazine and dime novels of the time, offer dramatic accounts of the troopers' exploits, which added to their mystique. They must have been an unforgettable sight. mounted units traveling in pairs 20 to 25 miles per day. They used phones and postcards to advise of their location for the next 24 hours. Long routes of travel during 1917 through 1919 had patrols following one another a week apart, so that the same trooper was seldom seen twice, conveying the idea that the force was larger than it was. No one could be sure when the Gray Riders would appear, which added to their reputation and had the side effect of keeping some order. In 1919, a county zone system was established, and troopers lodged at boarding houses and hotels, replaced after 3 months by another pair. The reasoning was that the men would work better if they were not well known. That independent nature is still part of our working life today. Horses were integral to the operations of the time. In 1918, the troopers entered into a cooperative agreement with the American Horse Association and the American Jockey Club to improve the breed of state police cavalry mounts. While in the Army, Chandler had been active in encouraging the breeding of horses for military purposes. Several high-end stud horses were placed at troop headquarters and made available to local farmers for a nominal fee. And the result was that no new mounts needed to be purchased. In November of 1918, Chandler took a leave of absence to serve in the Army Medical Corps. He got as far as the University of Chattanooga and a teaching assignment. Another attempt at making arrangements for troopers to serve as a cavalry unit was made, but the force was instead seen as a way to make up for National Guard soldiers who had been deployed for overseas combat. Superintendent Chandler returned to duty with the troopers in April of 1919. In his absence, there had been a political movement to abolish the state police led by the new governor, Alfred E. Smith. Chandler avoided the governor and instead did whatever he could to encourage the good work of his troopers. In June of that year, the governor sent for Chandler to discuss the future of the organization. During their discussion, in which Chandler advised the governor of the work and accomplishments of his force, Smith was persuaded to not only retain the troopers, but to support them to become, in his words, the best in the United States. Superintendent Chandler's contributions to the New York State Police and to policing in general were many. He coined the term trooper to describe his men during the first years of his agency's existence. And this is the way all state police agencies now refer to their women and men. He also came up with the motto, "Obedience to the law is liberty." Chandler served as personal physician for his men, and he continued to practice surgery throughout his tenure with the state police. As I mentioned earlier, he designed the uniform, which you can see has changed very little over the years. The purple ties and hat band and the shape of the octagonal shield that we carry are a direct reference to the Roman Praetorian Guard, who were the guardians of the Caesar, and similarly, the state police are the governor's police force. The other legendary explanation you may have heard about this is that purple was his first wife's favorite color, which is very convenient. So I'm sure both are true. The uniform itself is gray, and the original fabric, which was supposedly under patent, was a perfect mix of black and white threads to signify the neutrality of the agency and our place between the forces of evil and the forces of good. He later added a black stripe on the side of the pant leg to commemorate our fallen members. The iconic hat was literally created by Chandler. He had contacted J.B. Stetson Company in Philadelphia, and they sent him 50 campaign-style felt hats, which he cut up with scissors and reassembled until he had the iconic Stetson that we still all wear very proudly. Chandler was intent on making his troopers very distinct, and he deliberately had them leave their first assignment after training at the New York State Fair to travel to their troops on horseback. They traveled out to Troop A in Batavia. They traveled to Troop D in Onondaga Valley in the central part of the state. They traveled to Troop G, which at that time was somewhere on the Albany-Schenectady Road, and they traveled to Troop K at Gedney Farms in White Plains. They always patrolled in pairs, and they wore their Colt 45 sidearms exposed, which was quite shocking at the time. No one did this. His reason was simple: making it easier for the troopers to quickly reach their weapons made everyone safer. But it was surprisingly controversial, believe it or not, especially amongst the police community. He was actually booed at an IACP, an International Chiefs of Police event in Chicago. Of course, everyone does that now. Likewise, his troopers were the only police officers who carried their shield rather than wearing a badge, and of course that's still true today. Perhaps one of the oddest facts about the superintendent is his having invented the herringbone system of parking cars. Cars being relatively new at the time, and parking space being at a premium at that first state fair in 1917. He devised this way to park so that the use of space was maximized and people could get in and out very quickly. So the next time you're in a parking lot and you've pulled in the wrong way, facing the wrong way, you can thank Colonel Chandler for that innovation. The troopers displayed their horsemanship at the first state fair, and later on formed teams of trick riders which competed at horse shows and held public demonstrations. These here are riders from Troops C and D who were known as the most proficient of the Rough Riders. We still horse around. This trooper's name is Franklin Livingston Zay. We have a lot of photographs at the Academy and in our files and archives, and we have, unfortunately, many with no names. So whenever I have a picture of someone, I like to say who it is. Franklin Livingston Zay worked in Schoharie County, which is now part of Troop G. This is my favorite quote from Chandler. "Let us treat the everyday citizen as we would wish to be treated ourselves, with courtesy, with fairness, and above all, with honesty. If he calls on us for service, give him immediate attention, no matter how trivial the request. It means much to him, little to us, but perhaps a great deal to our profession." And I get to remind our recruit troopers of that, and my new troopers when I'm out in the field, because when they call us, it's probably not going to be the biggest thing that happened in their day, but it certainly is the biggest thing that happened in the person's day that called us. It's so important. And he had it right from the beginning. For the people of the time, these men were the New York State Police. It was absolutely vital that they be the best possible version of what Superintendent Chandler intended in order for our agency to survive, let alone succeed. So the power of one individual, I think, is clearly evident. The first professional police school in the nation was established by Chandler in 1921, the Troy YMCA, when the School for Police was created with an appropriation of $2,000. The school, the first to be accredited by the regents, trained troopers as well as police officers from all over the country. Chandler found time to write a textbook the following year, The Policeman's Art, and later an account of his work, Dawn Days of the State Police. He was also the author of many articles on policing and on the New York State Police. And this photo shows him with A.B. Moore, who was the first director of training. In 1921, Superintendent Chandler offered Governor Nathan Miller his resignation, believing that his work was done. He was asked to reconsider, and he did so on the condition that he be allowed to form two new troops, which he did, in Malone, Troop B, and in Sydney, Troop C. He stayed on for another 2 years, leaving for good on November 30th, 1923, to return to his medical practice. This remarkable man had been with our agency for less than a total of 7 years, give or take, but he'd created so much in that short time. The original 232 men were now a force of 700. Upon his resignation, Chandler was quoted as saying, "This department is by this time a living human organization, well officered, well housed, uniformed and equipped, with a definite, tried, and continuous policy. Therefore, I feel I can now leave the command with some degree of satisfaction." I just like these pictures. I'm just going to show you pictures of troopers. For the next 9 years, he practiced medicine and continued to contribute to the state. He was appointed to the New York State Crime Commission in 1926 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was a principal investigator of the Auburn prison riots. He retired from medicine on September 25th, 1932, just shy of his 60th birthday, as he said he had planned to do at the beginning of his working life. He and his second wife, Alice, traveled the world: Africa, India, China, Japan, Russia, Tibet. He was unable, however, to resist the urge to serve again when the Second World War broke out, and he re-entered the Army as a major in the Medical Corps, completing his tour of duty as a lieutenant colonel. Afterward, he returned to the University of Chattanooga as a guest lecturer. Chandler also continued to play the violin for many years, at one time directing an orchestra of 90 to 100 musicians. He wrote a light opera, and he staged 2 Gilbert and Sullivan operas as fundraisers for Kingston Hospital. Colonel Chandler is remembered with great affection by his family as a larger-than-life character, tough and proud, a powerful figure despite the years. This is a photo of him with Sergeant James J. Cunningham, who's on the left, of Saugerties, and Sergeant John Hopkins of Ellenville. Sergeant Hopkins was one of the original campmen from 1917, and he was the first to be sworn in as a New York State trooper. And that photo dates from 1938 or so. You can see Chandler, very dapper guy. On March 3rd, 1956, the testimonial dinner was given at the Governor Clinton Hotel by the Association of Former New York State Troopers. It's photographed from that event. And I was telling Mr. O'Neill when we started, when I was researching this, we have what we know, and it's always good to find new things, so I had new photos, and the photographer that works at the Academy kept coming up with stuff as recently as yesterday, actually, that we hadn't seen before. That picture I just showed you of the 2 sergeants was something we just came across. But I had this picture for a while, and just last week she came up with another copy of it with a picture with names on the back of it, and so I realized that I actually had the phone number of the gentleman to the left in the back row. So of course it's Colonel Chandler in the front. The man in the middle is, does anybody know who that is? Anybody guess? It's Mayor Schwank, right. In the middle. Mayor Schwank is in the middle. I'm sorry, is seated. And yes, the chief of police there, Chief Murphy from the Kingston Police Department. But the gentleman on the left behind Colonel Chandler is Bernie Ruchin, and he's a retired trooper. He lives in New Hampshire. He's 88 years old. I talked to him last night, and he had some very interesting stories to tell me about traveling with other troopers, other retired troopers, to the Governor Clinton to talk to Colonel Chandler and hear stories, tell war stories. And, it was wonderful to speak with him, but I wouldn't have known who that was until that picture came to me. So a little bit of magic, I think, that happens when you start looking into these stories, which I love. I have another story which takes place around the same time, and it's an oral history account, and I love the story. I'll tell you why after I read it to you. I did know the trooper that whose story this is, and he's passed away now a few years. But he was also a very interesting guy, Jack Harrison. He was a trooper from 1948 to 1976, and he gives this account of meeting Colonel Chandler. I think you'll appreciate it. One of the highlights of my career was meeting with the colonel in August of 1959. I was a uniformed sergeant at the time, and he was a retired superintendent and physician, and he lived in the Governor Clinton Hotel in Kingston. My assignment at the time was to work on a tour of the Hudson Valley by Her Royal Highness Beatrix, Princess of the Netherlands. That assignment took us to Kingston, where we stayed overnight at the Governor Clinton. In the morning, as we were getting ready to leave, someone, seeing me in uniform, asked if I knew Colonel Chandler. While I had met him once before, it was only a handshake greeting, and I did not actually know him. They pointed me toward the dining room and told me that he was having breakfast as we spoke. Curiosity took me into the room where he was. It was easy to recognize him, tall, although seated, thin, and with a bearing that was the result of a life in the military and police. He was 87 years old at the time. I was not certain of what to expect of him, and I even thought about leaving him alone. But I did not, and I walked across the room to his table. I was there before he realized that I was present. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could come up with. I saluted him, and I identified myself. While kind of surprised, he was also pleased that I called on him. You could sense that everyone else in the room was watching us. Apparently, not too many uniformed members called on him, at least not at breakfast. He was most warm and gracious. He was even going to stand up and greet me, but I encouraged him to remain seated, which he did. After I told him who I was and what I was doing there, he was very curious. Knowing that I was stationed in Division Headquarters, he asked about several people he knew there, including the then Superintendent, Francis F. McGarvey, who was one of his campmen. He asked about several others, all of whom I knew, and was able to fill him in on their current status. That seemed to please him quite a bit. He wanted to know some things about the job, basically how we were doing, and I assured him that everything was going along well. After a short time, I informed him that I had to leave, and he replied that he wished we had more time to visit. We shook hands, and as I walked toward the door, I noted that all the other folks in the room, old-timers like himself, were still watching. When I reached the door, I looked back, and even he was watching me. I stopped, I turned, and saluted him again. He did not salute, but he did wave, and there was a smile on his face. And I suspect that the New York State Police made his day that morning. Now, when I read that story, I am just reminded of just how incredible it is when you think about, here's a man in the later years of his life, and he's confronted with one of his contributions to the world brought to life. And I think it's just a wonderful story, and it must have been a wonderful moment both for Sergeant Harrison and Colonel Chandler. In June of 1964, shortly after the New York State Police moved into an office building at the Harriman State Office campus, Colonel Chandler paid a visit to Division Headquarters. He was 92 years old. During his visit, he was photographed with the portrait painted of him by his cousin, Howard Chandler Christie. And I would encourage you to Google him, because it's so interesting. This is a very stern portrait of Colonel Chandler. It's lovely, but Howard Chandler Christie's other work is much different. Just Google him. Colonel Chandler died at his Kingston nursing home on November 6th of 1964. He still held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Reserve Medical Corps, and it is said that he preferred the title colonel to superintendent, a proud soldier to the end. His ashes were scattered over a falls just south of Saugerties, in a place he knew to be part of the original patrol area of his brand new troopers so long ago. So what's the rest of the story? I believe this agency is one that Chandler would still recognize as his own. We've grown from 232 camp men to our present strength of just over 4,500 women and men, serving their communities with enthusiasm and great pride. We've grown from 4 original troops to 11. We have women troopers. And the long gray line endures. Our mission has changed very little, but each of us is forever changed when we become a part of the New York State Police. I want to thank you for your interest and your attention. And for your kind invitation. Thank you for your kind invitation.
We thank you for coming and doing this.
Yeah.
We thank you so much. This was very interesting. Do we have any questions for Major Benziger?
Where is the training academy located today?
It's in Albany on the state office campus off of Route 90. We've been there since about 1970. We train all of our brand new troopers there. We actually have a class in place right now, and we do a lot of the training for our entire membership there.
to train the state troopers as well as the local police agencies?
No, that has changed. That changed in the 1950s, and there are local academies now for local police officers. We have our academy there is unusual in that it is a residential academy. So the troopers come in on Monday or Sunday night, they stay all week and leave on late on Friday afternoon. So the local academies are not residential academies, but we have them. They're ours for the whole week. So, and the program is longer. The program is about 6 months long.
There's a question from my father back there.
Who were the first instructors?
The first instructors in Camp Nuevo was an interesting group of people to include local district attorneys, some judges. There were some doctors. Of course, Dr. Chandler was on staff there teaching them at the camp. So they reached out to their subject matter experts. When they moved to Troy, they did much the same thing. They had an interesting group of guest lecturers. And we do the same. And we do a lot of our own training, but we do bring other people in for certain topics.
When did women first go into the department?
I'm so glad you asked. 1973, so it only took 56 years for them to figure out that women might be a good idea to have on the job. But those 4 women I showed you, I showed that picture on purpose. Let me get back to that. Those 4 women there, and I know 2 of them. One of them unfortunately has passed away. They were young, they were young women in their early 20s. And the state police were hiring women under a consent decree. So there was a lot of confusion about having women and what their role might be. And when they entered our academy on short notice, there was not a lot of planning. You'll see them wearing skirts. And they were never intended to wear skirts on patrol, but it actually took some doing during the school for them to convince the people running the school that they should have a proper uniform, that they should be given a Stetson to wear. There was actually a plan to have them wear foolish-looking airline stewardess hats. And so I think the women owe them a debt of gratitude, certainly for being who they were at the time, and also for them leaving the academy and going out into the field and doing the work that they did. And as time goes on, I think every woman feels that way, that the work they do reflects on the ones coming after them. It's so wonderful. I'm starting my 30th year with the state police, and I've seen that arc of experience in that short period of time, and it's so encouraging and inspiring to me to see the young women we get now that don't have any, there's no question about whether they can do the work, and there's no question about whether they will do the work, and it's great for me to see that, because it wasn't always so.
You mentioned that women were hired under a consent decree.
Mm-hmm. Police agencies didn't routinely hire women at that time, in the early 70s. And we were not the only agency to be asked, urged, required to hire some women. That is all about having your police force reflect the people that you serve. And so this was something that happened at that time, and then later on, we always try to recruit, as I said, to reflect the people that we serve. And right now, I think we have something like 385 women out of a total of almost 4,500 members total. So, it's not for everyone. But I think that the women we have are very, very proud. I think I said it the other night with a retirement party for one of our women, and I made a comment about how we think of ourselves as being a group of certain status, and those women within that group are very proud to be within that group, a smaller subset of that bigger group.
I have a personal connection with Dr. Chandler in that he performed an appendectomy on my grandmother.
How did that go? Yeah, he was quite a guy. There was a family member told me a story which I will not repeat, but he was a wonderful surgeon with a wonderful sense of humor, and I imagine he must have done a lot of work in the area. He never stopped working while he was even with the state police, so it's just incredible.
Is college education necessary before they do police training?
For the state police, it is. We require 60 hours of college credit prior to your coming to us unless you have military service. And we forgive half of that for active military.
And how long is the training then?
6 months long. It's 26 weeks. So we have a class in right now. They'll graduate the end of May. We'll have another one come in after that, and then a third class this year. So if you look at the calendar, that's an overlap. We have a little overlapping going on. It's very exciting, though. We haven't hired for a while, so. Yes, ma'am.
I see the state police on the thruway, but how are they dispatched? Do they work with our local 911 dispatch system, or, you know, how do they interact with the local police?
The thruway is a special troop in that they only cover the New York State thruway, so the whole length of it from Buffalo to New York and below to New York. And the thruway is actually dispatched by Albany Dispatch for them. The local 911, depending on where it's answered, and it's answered in different places across New York State, but there are ways for 911 to quickly send a call somewhere else, one-button dispatch, it's called, one-button transfer, and so we get those calls. But state police are dispatched by their own dispatchers in a decentralized fashion.
Is there a question in the back?
No, I was just going to make a comment. In the original appointment of women in September '73, there were actually 5 women appointed.
Right.
Another one whose brother is a Kingston policeman now, Bowers.
Yeah, there was one. Actually, of these 4, the one on the right, Regina Robbins, was actually the first one sworn in. The other 3, and probably that 4th woman, 5th woman, were held up because there was actually another lawsuit that was in place by a male member of the class. So there was a lot of disorder around them coming on, and they held steady. Very proud of them. Yes, sir?
Can you talk about the BCI? Was that just an extension of the troopers?
The Bureau of Criminal Investigation was formed in the 1930s as a result of a perceived need to free the troopers up from extended investigations. So that's our non-uniformed side of the house. And they do major investigations. Troopers, everyone who comes with the state police, comes on the state police, starts out the same way as a trooper on the road. And then after that time, they either take promotion exams and move up the ranks, or they may stay in place, which is really great because then we get really talented people that stay in place for a while, or they go into the bureau and become investigators. So yeah, it was a relatively new phenomenon that started in the 1930s.
Any other questions? Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Benziger, again, thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. My
Thank you
pleasure.
so much. I'm gonna get to the end. And I want to just tell the story of how Major Benziger came to be here tonight, because it really shows, again, what this lecture series is about. When we had decided that Colonel Chandler would be a wonderful topic for a lecture in this series, we had to find somebody to do this. So I searched high and low on the internet through the state police to see if they had a state police historian. I couldn't find it, and I found just a kind of a general email. So I sent an email. I kind of described briefly what the series is about, what we're doing, that we wanted to use Colonel Chandler as a subject, that he was from Kingston. And I almost immediately received a response back from Major Benziger, who said, we don't have an official historian, but I love history, and for us in the state police, Colonel Chandler is a monumental figure. So we are so proud of him, and we're so happy that your lecture series and that Kingston wants to honor him. So I would love to do this. She was thanking us for the opportunity, and that shows a lot about Major Benziger and about the state police, that she is willing. She was willing to do all this for free on her own time. So we really appreciate this. I know I certainly learned a lot. I learned a lot just in the few conversations I had with Major Benziger prior to tonight that I never knew. All I really knew was that we had Colonel Chandler Drive, which I drive my daughter up, and I point out to her, I always say, you want to go on the shortest interstate in the country? And she always says yes. She's 6, but she loves it. So it is wonderful. Again, this is what we're trying to do here. People like Colonel Chandler that most people walking down the street don't know. Yet here's a man with no law enforcement experience who really set forth what all law enforcement agencies in the world use today. So it's incredible the people that have come from Kingston. And the mark that we've had, again, as I've said before, not only in the state, but in the nation and in the world. So it's great that we're able to do this, and it's wonderful that we have speakers such as Major Benziger who are willing to give their time and their effort to do this. So please thank her. If you see her milling around, I'm sure she can answer any of the questions you have. Please, I know that I was a former prosecutor. I was always asked how I could get off traffic tickets and everything. Please don't do that to her, okay? We also want to thank a few other people, the Senate House, Tom and Dina and Jacob. The Senate House is closed. It's actually closed for the season. But even when it's not closed for the season, they're closed and they open this special for us to have this series here. So we really appreciate everything that they do, and please thank them. Bob Rizzo, again, who films these. Bob is a true professional. We're lucky to have him. He takes these and they put them on Channel 23, Esopus Community Public Access TV. You may be able to see it. It'll be on all next week. If you want a copy of this, please see Bob. He makes these. They are spectacular. We also want to thank all the people who publicize this event for us. We have Hugh Reynolds from Kingston Times, who always does a spread on the subjects and is here at every single presentation that we make. Jillian Fisher, she's constantly sending out websites reminding everybody of our events, so we appreciate that. Friends of Historic Kingston, they always put our lecture series on their website, and many of you may have seen it on there. Ulster County Tourism, Kingston Community Radio, the Kingston Happenings website, the Daily Freeman Preview puts us in there. And Walt Witkowski takes our flyers and puts them on the Civil War Roundtable page. So we thank all those people. I also want to thank Kingston's Buried Treasures. The members really put in a lot of effort. It's not easy. It's easy to come up with the subjects. Our community is fortunate that we have so many wonderful people, but it's not necessarily easy to find the speakers and set everything up. So please thank them as well. We have Joe Tantillo, who handles all the print and video media that we have, all the logos and everything. We have Ed Ford, a Kingston City historian, and Ed also brings a personal touch regarding Colonel Chandler, because I believe, Ed, both your brothers, or one? Both Ed's brothers had their tonsils removed by Colonel Chandler. And for the rest of their lives, every time they met people, they would ask Ed's brothers to open their mouths, and they would inspect the wonderful job that Colonel Chandler did. So he was a wonderful surgeon. Ed, thank you for letting us know that. Ann Gordon, our Ulster County historian. Pat Murphy, who's also involved with Friends of Historic Kingston. Tom Hoffey, who is our city alderman for the 1st Ward. And Nina Posupak, our Ulster County clerk. And especially all of you. Without you, we wouldn't be here. It's great to see so many people who are interested in our community and in our local figures. We have had unbelievable people who have lived here. And it's great. As long as you keep coming, we'll keep going. There is an almost endless supply of subjects. And while we're on that subject, I'll tell you the next couple events we have. February 15th at 5:30 p.m., again, right here. Our Kingston historian, Ed Ford, will be doing Ezra Fitch. Has anybody heard of Ezra Fitch in here? I always ask the jurors. They never do, but Ezra Fitch is the Fitch and founder of Abercrombie & Fitch. Did you know he lived in Kingston? He did. He lived right on the corner of Maiden Lane and Fair Street. If you're driving by tonight, you can look at his house. It's the bright yellow house. But one of our Kingston residents, he was an attorney here. He was a real estate developer. He got very disillusioned with the practice of law. I can tell you I did the same exact thing. Unfortunately, he went on to form one of the world's largest clothing retailers. I have not. But Ed Ford will tell us all about Ezra Fitch. March 22nd, Joe Tantillo is going to be speaking on the subject of John Vanderlyn, which is very appropriate because we are, tonight, in the Vanderlyn Room of the Senate House Museum. You are in the midst of the largest collection in the world of John Vanderlyn paintings. So that will be March 22nd, 5:30 p.m. We hope you can all come. I wish you all to have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again for coming. Major Benziger, thank you.
I almost forgot.
Oh.
I almost forgot that I brought props. How nervous I was, right? I have a photograph, if anyone is interested in seeing it. It's a rare photograph. It's a photograph of the officers from Camp Nuevo, but the interesting thing about it, maybe to you, is this is the only photograph I know of Chick Chandler. He's on the porch here. He's 12 years old. It's kind of a hoot. And also, if you're at all interested in our uniforms, I swear to you, 2 days ago, we came across the original design, the original drawings, and some paperwork on gray stationery with purple writing. What is so interesting about this to me is that we had a fire. There was a fire in 1924 that destroyed a lot of early documents for the state police. And this was in my first sergeant's file cabinet. And he came in and he said, "Do you think this is anything?" And it's very rare stuff. So if you're like really geekishly interested, like I am, in this kind of thing, it's kind of cool. And I just brought it along in case anyone would want to see. I knew there would be some retired members here, so if you want to see it, it's up here. I almost forgot. Our 100th anniversary is coming up, so if there's things that you have, photographs you have, or people you know that have photographs, we would love to borrow them and scan them. We're always looking for images that we've never seen before. And if anyone is in the Albany area and would like to take a look at our small museum, please let us know. We do let the public come in and take a look, and we'd be delighted to have you. Thank you.